Listen up, guys. Before we dive into the weeds today, we need to set the scene and address the reality of where we are. It is July 28th, 2026. Exactly 5 months ago, the United States kicked off Operation Epic Fury, unleashing the most formidable military apparatus in human history. We are talking about 2 full-carrier strike groups, 60,000 military personnel spread across the theater, and upward of 6,000 distinct targets decimated. We've seen the deployment of specialized bunker-busting munitions, engineered specifically to crack open the subterranean fortresses Iran spent the last 20 years constructing. And yet, this morning, Tehran released 2 separate statements that you need to analyze side by side. When you look at them together, they paint a picture that directly contradicts the narrative you are being fed by mainstream headlines. The first statement was delivered by Iran's Foreign Ministry spokesperson, Esmail Baghei. He got in front of the press corps and essentially said, and I am paraphrasing, but closely, that he is absolutely baffled by how Washington thinks it is managing this conflict. Think about that. The nation that is supposedly crumbling under the weight of the greatest military machine on earth just sent its top spokesperson out to publicly mock the American strategy. The second statement came from Abbas Araghchi, the foreign minister. He was addressing a totally separate, brand new crisis, a Ukrainian drone strike on an Iranian commercial ship sailing the Caspian Sea. Araghchi labeled it a violation of the United Nations Charter that cannot go unanswered. 2 statements, 2 high-ranking officials, 2 entirely different geopolitical crises, both unfolding today. Keep that in the back of your mind because it is crucial. We are 210 days into this. 6,000 targets gone, 60,000 troops, hundreds of billions of taxpayer dollars burned, and Iran isn't folding. They are actively opening entirely new fronts. When you look at this, you basically have 2 choices. Option A, you write it off as standard authoritarian bluster. You assume they are just talking tough for the cameras. Option B, you pause, take a step back, and ask the uncomfortable question that cable news anchors are terrified to touch. What if Tehran is actually right? That is exactly what we are unpacking today. And I guarantee you by the time this video is over, you are going to recognize a massive blind spot that almost every foreign policy pundit, journalist, and think tank analyst is missing entirely. The data isn't hidden. It's completely public. The problem is they are staring at 6 isolated news stories when they should be analyzing one cohesive, overarching narrative. Let's get into what is genuinely playing out. First, let me give you the mental framework for how to process everything we cover today. I drill this into my university students on day 1. You have to view every geopolitical crisis as a complex game. To decode the game, you must identify 3 variables. You have to know the players, you have to understand the rules, and above all else, you have to map the incentives. Incentives dictate how people will actually behave, which rarely matches what they claim they will do. Make sense? When you overlay that framework onto the current chaos in the Middle East, you don't see a victorious American military campaign. You see a chessboard where every single actor's incentives are driving the war toward an outcome that Washington either completely failed to predict or simply refuses to admit out loud. I'm going to walk you through 6 specific events from the last 48 hours. Watch how they link together. Let's start with the story that Western media barely touched. On July 27th, Ukraine launched a drone attack on an Iranian commercial vessel. But here is the kicker. It happened in the Caspian Sea, not the Red Sea, not the Persian Gulf, the Caspian Sea, a landlocked body of water that Tehran has treated as its untouchable strategic backyard for generations. Let that marinate for a moment. Iran is already locked in a massive conflict with the US and Israel on one side, and now, out of nowhere, a completely different nation strikes their shipping on a completely different body of water. Foreign Minister Araghchi immediately threatened retaliation. But then Ebrahim Azizi, the head of Iran's National Security Committee, did something fascinating. He issued a threat to Kiev, and he wrote it in Ukrainian. He posted it in their native language because he wanted absolutely zero confusion about the intended recipient. He stated that Ukraine was about to deeply regret its miscalculation. But the most important part wasn't the threat. It was the strategic rationale Tehran provided. They openly accused Israel of orchestrating the Ukrainian strike. Why? to force Europe's hand, to drag European governments out of the gray zone and explicitly into the wider war. Tehran is broadcasting how they read the board. This is no longer a localized Middle Eastern fight. It is rapidly expanding into a regional, multilateral war. You could argue this is just Tehran spinning a narrative, but maybe they're pointing out a reality, because look at what is happening to NATO. The alliance is buckling. France and Spain just went on the record calling the joint US-Israeli strikes on Iran illegal. They didn't say disproportionate or unwise. They used the word illegal. That is France, holding a permanent veto on the UN Security Council, and Spain, a vital southern flank military partner, openly breaking with Washington. Yesterday, July 28th, the Pentagon announced a sweeping reassessment of all American military deployments across Europe. When I saw that press release, I didn't think, oh, this is just Trump trying to shake down NATO. My immediate thought was, why is the Department of Defense doing this right now? What is the actual catalyst? If you peel back the layers, it's two overlapping crises. First, the diplomatic rupture is severe. We just watched U.S. diplomats physically walk out of a UN Security Council meeting while the French envoy had the floor. That isn't standard friction. That is a total breakdown. NATO members are now denying American forces the use of European soil to launch operations against Iran. Operationally, that is a nightmare. America relies on its European footprint. If those bases are locked down, Washington faces massive logistical bottlenecks, all while publicly warring with its core allies at the exact moment it desperately needs their political legitimacy. Second, and far more alarming, is the math. General Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, sat in front of Congress and flat out admitted that air superiority has hard limits, and that America's dwindling munitions stockpiles are currently dictating battlefield decisions. Defense Secretary Hegseth echoed this, stating the defense industrial base is wildly overstretched. Let me translate that Pentagon speak for you. The reigning superpower of the world is running out of bullets. They are lacking the hardware required to keep this tempo up, and they are openly telling lawmakers that it is handcuffing their strategy. Strategically, this is the reality. The United States is not just fighting Tehran, it is simultaneously trying to box in China over Taiwan, keep Ukraine armed, maintain deterrence in North Korea, and drop bombs across Iran, all using manufacturing supply chains that simply cannot keep pace. That Caspian Sea strike didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened while the U.S. military is being forced to ration its power. That European reassessment is just the Pentagon trying to find spare capacity. Now, let's pivot to Iran's internal situation, because this perfectly illustrates why Washington's maximum pressure campaign is misfiring. Yesterday morning in Isfahan, the Iranian government publicly executed two young men in Ali Khani Square, Abul Fazl Sepahi and Amir Hossein Safari. They were convicted for their roles in the January 2026 protest wave. I want to pause here and be incredibly precise. I am going to analyze this through a pure game theory lens. I am not validating or excusing this brutality. I am breaking down the cold, strategic logic behind it. Because if you ignore their logic, you will be permanently blind to their next move. As we've discussed before, Iran designed its entire state apparatus around resilience and decentralization. The goal is to ensure no single localized failure can topple the regime. That exact philosophy governs their internal wartime security. During a massive war, a state cannot let opposition breathe. You cannot allow dissenters to organize. If a local police chief or security unit starts sympathizing with protesters, the entire chain of command fractures. We know the US and Israeli intelligence communities ran a massive psychological warfare op against Iran called Prison Break. The objective was to flood the zone with AI-generated media and targeted digital campaigns to trigger an uprising while the regime was distracted by bombs. But according to America's own intelligence assessments, Prison Break was a bust. Elite regime cohesion held together. There were no mass military mutinies. And those executions in Isfahan? That is the regime's grim answer. They are signaling to 88 million Iranians. We see the dissidents. We have the capability to hunt you down, and the penalty is death. It is horrifying, yes, but is it an effective way to crush internal rebellion during a hot war? Mathematically, yes. Now look at Iran's external chessboard, because this is the data point analysts are skipping over. Israel has hammered Hezbollah. Hamas is a shadow of its former self. Iran's primary deterrent proxies are badly wounded. So does Tehran just wave a white flag and admit their proxy strategy is dead? No. They pivot. Right now, Iran is pouring its resources into the Houthis down in Yemen. But here is the critical shift. They aren't relying on slow, easily intercepted smuggling ships anymore. Tehran has established a direct, continuous air bridge right into Sana'a, flying high-tech military hardware straight into Yemen. Why does an air bridge matter? Let me tie this back to the dual choke point concept from my last video. If the Houthis get fully restocked and rearmed, we are looking at a catastrophe. Iran already exerts massive pressure over the Strait of Hormuz. If the Houthis go back on the offensive, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the gatekeeper to the Red Sea, gets choked off at the exact same time. Practically speaking, you're looking at 20% of the globe's crude oil, Hormuz, and the bulk of Asian-European shipping, Red Sea, getting throttled simultaneously. That wouldn't just cause a spike at the gas pump. It would fundamentally break global supply chains. It would impact every single market on the planet. That isn't a military tactic. It is a global hostage scenario. The U.S. has 60,000 personnel trying to solve this, but Pentagon planners know it would take well over 100,000 boots on the ground just to secure the Strait of Hormuz alone. That massive disparity isn't an accident. Iran has spent years quietly digging this exact trap. All right, let's talk about the Washington summit between Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu. This is where military strategy collides head-on with raw domestic politics. If you want to know why this war has dragged on for 210 days, look right here. On July 27th, Netanyahu flew out of Nevatim Air Base, a military facility, because civilian airports were too risky due to Iranian threats. He landed in D.C. for a summit with Trump on the 28th. But right before he left the tarmac, the Israeli cabinet signed off on a massive concession, allowing the ISF, International Stabilization Force, to deploy 200 troops into Gaza. On paper, that looks like a tactical shift. But look at the calendar. My sources and multiple others confirm that greenlighting the ISF was essentially the cover charge Netanyahu had to pay to get the meeting with Trump. Why is that important? Because it reveals the leverage. Trump desperately needed this summit to project momentum. He needed to show the American electorate that he is steering this chaos toward peace. Netanyahu needed the photo op just as badly. Without visible American backing, Netanyahu's domestic political survival is mathematically impossible. Both leaders are staring down the barrel of looming elections. Trump is heading into November with a fractured electorate. Inflation is ticking back up. Oil is expensive. Supply chains are snarled. The American public is exhausted by foreign entanglements. Trump made his political bones blasting the forever wars. Now he's presiding over a colossal, open-ended bombing campaign in the Middle East with zero clear off-ramps. He desperately needs something, anything, he can package and sell as a victory to voters. Netanyahu's reality is arguably worse. His entire brand relies on being the indispensable shield against Iran and the only man who can manage Washington. If the White House pulls its backing, his coalition crumbles. He is fighting legal battles, domestic outrage, and managing a grinding war in Gaza simultaneously. He needed to stand next to the U.S. president and project absolute unity. But guys, here is the fatal flaw in all of this. When you have two heads of state maneuvering a massive war based on their personal polling numbers, they stop asking, what is the smartest military move? And start asking, what looks best on television? The result is performative strategy. Decisions that look muscular, but actually accomplish nothing on the ground. That is the exact theater we are witnessing right now. And just to cement how messy this is, consider this final piece of the puzzle. While Trump and Bibi were shaking hands in D.C., the government of Oman was sitting down for bilateral talks directly with Iran. Iran's foreign ministry flaunted the fact that America was totally excluded from these talks. What were they discussing? Oman pitched a framework to jointly manage the Strait of Hormuz, treating it like the Strait of Malacca. The concept is that commercial ships would pay a voluntary transit toll directly to Iran in exchange for a guarantee they wouldn't be blown up. And guess what? Several Arab states are quietly on board with this. Kuwait literally just inked a strategic defense pact with Pakistan, not the Pentagon, but Pakistan. The Gulf monarchies are looking at the chessboard, realizing Washington might actually lose this, and they are furiously hedging their bets. Oman's top diplomat, Badr al-Busaidi, didn't mince words. He publicly declared that Washington has lost control of the steering wheel, that Israel is dragging the U.S. into an abyss, and he labeled the entire campaign a catastrophe. When your own strategic partners are roasting you in the press, you have entirely lost the narrative war. Okay, now it's time to do what I always promised to do on this channel. I am going to steelman the opposition. I want to build the absolute strongest argument that the United States is actually winning this war. If you only ever defend your own bias, you aren't an analyst. You're a propagandist. Here is the optimistic case. Washington has obliterated 6,000 high-value targets. They have successfully pushed Iran's nuclear ambitions back by half a decade. The sanctions are bleeding the regime dry. The Iranian rial is in freefall. Hyperinflation is gutting their middle class. We saw massive riots in January. And now, after 5 months of getting hammered, Tehran is secretly negotiating through Oman and back-channeling with Pakistan. Confident, winning empires do not scramble for back channels. Desperate, suffocating regimes do. Therefore, if the U.S. just maintains the squeeze, the dam will eventually break. That is a highly compelling argument. But here is the single biggest flaw in that logic. It fails to explain why, after 5 months of relentless destruction, Iran's operational footprint is growing, not shrinking. They are carving out new logistics networks. They are turning the Caspian Sea into a flashpoint, using a Ukrainian drone strike as political cover to push boundaries they wouldn't have dared cross last year. They are bypassing the seas entirely to build an air bridge to the Houthis, and the surrounding Arab states are quietly sidestepping Washington to cut their own survival deals. Maximum pressure campaigns are designed to cause cascading failures. You hit the system until the center cannot hold and the whole thing falls apart. But as I've mapped out before, Iran's government wasn't built to operate that way. It was engineered from the ground up to absorb massive kinetic trauma. The optimistic view prays that the pressure will finally crack the foundation. The pessimistic view, which aligns with the actual data on the ground, suggests that Iran is simply absorbing the blows exactly as they designed their system to do. The U.S. is running a playbook against an adversary immune to that specific playbook. So what should you be tracking over the next week and a half? First, keep your eyes glued to the Rome negotiations, happening August 4th through the 6th. The primary metric is whether Israel agrees to pull out of the southern Lebanon pilot zone. If they pull back, it means someone in the White House has finally done the math, realized the bleeding is too severe, and forced Israel to accept an off-ramp. If Israel digs in, containment is dead, and this war is about to get much bigger. Second, monitor Tehran's retaliation for the Caspian Sea incident. They vowed revenge against Ukraine. If they launch kinetic strikes against Ukrainian assets, the map just expanded into Europe's backyard. But if Tehran stays completely quiet over the next 10 days, that is a massive tell. It means they possess the strategic discipline to ignore distractions and keep 100% of their focus on the Hormuz theater. Third, watch that Tehran-Sanaa air bridge. Look to see if U.S. or Israeli jets try to shoot those cargo planes down. If they do, it confirms Washington recognizes the existential threat of a rearmed Houthi militia. If they let the planes land, expect a massive wave of Houthi missile strikes on Red Sea shipping within 2 months. Once that secondary choke point locks up, the global economic shockwaves will be devastating. I want to close with a historical parallel that haunts me when I look at the current board. There is a term in military doctrine called mission creep. It's what happens when you launch a war to achieve one highly specific thing, and slowly, incrementally, your goals morph until the original purpose is entirely forgotten. The U.S. invaded Afghanistan in 2001 strictly to crush al-Qaeda. 2 decades later, the Taliban took the keys to Kabul. The U.S. invaded Iraq in 2003 to find WMDs. We ended up birthing ISIS and destabilizing the region for a generation. The outcomes had nothing to do with the original sales pitch. Operation Epic Fury started with one clear mandate: eradicate the Iranian nuclear program. Look at where we are 5 months later. Now, Trump is demanding Saudi Arabia sign the Abraham Accords before he stops the bombing. Washington is insisting the Lebanese military forcibly disarm Hezbollah, which is a total fantasy, and everyone knows it. The U.S. has moved from destroying centrifuges to forcibly redesigning the political architecture of the entire Middle East. That is not a military strategy. That is imperial overreach. There is no victory condition here. There is no finish line. In 1796, George Washington wrote his farewell address, and it feels like it was written this morning. He explicitly warned that a nation becomes a slave to its own foreign policy when it develops an irrational, passionate attachment to an ally. He warned that blind loyalty would drag America into fighting someone else's battles, sacrificing its own wealth and blood for another nation's agenda. He was warning the country about France. You tell me if that logic applies today. Here is the question I want you to walk away with today. I don't have the definitive answer, but it is the only question that matters. When you synthesize all of this, the Caspian Sea escalation, the Isfahan executions, the Yemen air bridge, two politicians managing a war to win elections, the Gulf states bailing on Washington, and the Pentagon admitting it's running out of bombs, the real question isn't whether America is winning the war. The question is this still a war America chose to fight, or has it become a trap that Washington has no idea how to escape? Let me know what you think down below. If you think my read is flawed, tell me exactly where I missed the mark. That is how we refine our analysis. Find the variable I ignored. If this framework holds up to your scrutiny, it proves it has merit. If it breaks, we both walk away smarter. All right, guys, that's it for today. Stay curious.